Title: The Lighthouse Ledger. Mara Reed learned early that the ocean never repeats itself. Not in the color of a wave, not in the sound of a rope snapping, not even in the way salt stung the same cut twice. On the morning everything changed. She was on the back deck of her family's repair shed, rinsing crab pots with a hose that coughed like an old smoker. The harbor smelled of diesel, wet nets, and the sweet, smoky breath of kelp being roasted for the winter lantern fair. Her father, Dad, in the only way that mattered, had a wrench between his teeth while he argued with a stubborn outboard motor. And her mother had her sleeves rolled to the elbow, paint speckled from touching up the shed sign for the 10th time. Reed and CO, boat, repair, bait, and honest advice. Mara liked that last part most. Honest advice didn't keep you warm, but it kept you from drowning in your own head. She was scrubbing barnacles when the shouting started on the pier. Not the usual friendly yelling of fishermen, but a sharp kind of silence that formed before sound, like a gull hovering over a dropped sandwich. Mara leaned around a stack of buoys and saw two strangers standing where the fair's volunteers had been hanging paper lanterns. They looked like they'd stepped out of a city billboard and into a puddle by mistake. The man's coat was too clean for the dock. The woman's boots too expensive to pretend they didn't notice fish guts. Their hands kept hovering, unsure what to touch, as if the air itself might smear them. Her mother noticed them at the same moment, and set down her paintbrush with a carefulness that made Mara's stomach tighten. "Can I help you?" Her mother called, wiping her hands on a rag that would never be clean again. The woman drew a breath that trembled at the edges. "We're looking for a girl," she said, and her voice had the sound of someone who had practiced in front of mirrors and still couldn't get it right. "Our daughter." Mara's father spat the wrench into his palm, stood up, and stepped forward without hurry. In Port Hollow, people did not rush toward trouble. They placed themselves between it and what they loved. "If you're selling something," he said, "try the fair committee. If you're accusing someone, try the police. If you're lost, the diner is that way." The man swallowed hard, eyes flicking to Mara as if pulled by a magnet. "We aren't here to accuse," he said. "We're here to correct something that was done by accident." Mara felt the hose slip and spray her sneakers. The woman's gaze landed on Mara with such raw relief that Mara almost looked behind herself, as if someone else stood there. "Mara," her mother said softly, without turning. "Come here, honey." That honey was a rope thrown to someone in rough water. Mara shut off the hose and walked, wiping her hands on her jeans. As she approached, she saw the man's eyes were tired in a way money didn't fix. His jaw clenched and unclenched, as if he'd been holding a word in his mouth for years. "My name is Alden Voss," he said. "This is my wife, Celeste." The name meant nothing to Mara until the fair volunteer beside them whispered, "Voss Maritime?" Like a prayer or a curse. Voss Maritime owned half the shipping contracts up the coast, and the other half were owned by people who wanted to be Voss Maritime. Mara waited for someone to laugh and say it was a skit for the lantern fair. The woman, Celeste, opened a folder, and the paper inside looked too white, too official. 17 years ago, she began, there was a hurricane that hit the coast and tore the highway apart. Port Hollow's clinic became a triage center. 2 women went into labor at the same time. Mara's mother made a sound in her throat, small and broken. The folder shook in Celeste's hands. A nurse overworked, terrified, mixed up 2 wristbands. It wasn't discovered until recently. Alden's voice was steadier. "Our younger daughter needed blood after an accident. The match didn't make sense. Then genetics didn't make sense. Then nothing made sense until it did." Mara stared at the folder as if it contained a different life, folded small enough to fit in a stranger's hands. "No," she whispered, because saying no was the only thing she could control. Her father's hand came down on her shoulder, heavy and warm. "We got a test," Alden said, and he sounded like he hated every syllable. "We verified with the clinic records and with you." Celeste's eyes filled and overflowed. "We're not here to take you like property," she said quickly, as if she'd read the same cautionary stories Mara had heard online. Those sleek tragedies about rich families and cruel mansions. "We just want to meet you. We want you to know the truth. We want to know you." For a moment the dock held its breath. Somewhere a kid laughed and a lantern bobbed in the wind. And life kept moving because life always did. Mara's mother stepped forward and took Mara's hand. "If you're telling the truth," her mother said, "then you didn't lose a daughter for 17 years. We did." Her voice did not break. It sharpened, so you'll excuse us if we don't know what face to wear. Celeste nodded, grief and humility braided together. "We deserve your anger," she said. Alden looked at Mara again. Her name is Sable, he added, as if offering a map. The girl we raised. She doesn't know yet. We didn't want to. He stopped, because there was no clean way to say any of it. Mara's father's thumb rubbed the back of Mara's shoulder, a small grounding motion. Mara, he said quietly, do you want to hear the rest? Mara's thoughts scattered like baitfish. She remembered reading, late at night, stories about hidden heirs and staged kindness, about real daughters treated like intruders. She remembered promising herself that if she ever stepped into someone else's world, she'd keep her head down and survive. But then she looked at her parents, her real parents in every way she'd ever needed, and she saw fear there too. Fear of losing what they'd built with calloused hands and bedtime stories. Mara inhaled the harbor air and tasted kelp smoke and salt. I want to know, she said, voice shaking, but I don't want to be taken. Celeste's shoulders sagged with relief. Then we'll come to you, she said. We'll sit at your table. We'll listen, and if you decide, later, that you want to see our home, you'll do it on your terms. Mara's mother stared at them for a long, hard beat, then nodded once. Sit, she said, pointing to a bench outside the shed that had seen more arguments and reconciliations than any therapist. The bench creaked under the weight of history and 2 elegant coats. Alden tried to fold himself smaller, as if shrinking would make his presence less intrusive. Celeste kept glancing at Mara, like she was afraid Mara would vanish if she blinked. They talked, haltingly at first, then with the strange momentum of dammed water, the hurricane, the clinic, the nurse who had later quit, the sealed file, the private investigator who had found a thread, the accident that had forced the truth to the surface. When Alden slid a photo across the bench, 2 newborns wrapped in identical blankets, Mara's throat tightened until words became impossible. In the photo, one baby had a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark near her ear. Mara reached up, fingers trembling, and touched the same crescent on her own skin. Her mother's breath caught. Her father's gaze fell to the mark and stayed there, the way a sailor watches a lighthouse through fog. We didn't steal you, Mara's mother whispered, and it wasn't a defense so much as a plea to the universe. You were handed to us. You were ours the second you cried. Alden's see-through pain made Mara unexpectedly angry, because his suffering meant this wasn't a simple villain story. Where is Sable now? Mara asked, words sharp as fishhooks. Celeste exhaled. At home, she said, recovering. The accident wasn't life-threatening, but it frightened us all. She's 17, like you. She's bright, stubborn. She draws constantly. She draws when she's happy, and she draws when she's hurt. Mara pictured a girl in a gleaming room with a sketchbook like a shield. Does she know? Not yet, Alden admitted. We wanted to speak to you first. We needed to make sure we weren't about to explode her life with rumors. Mara's father stood, suddenly restless. Rumors get here faster than storms, he said. If you're doing this, do it right. Celeste nodded again, the motion of someone who had lost the right to argue. We'd like to invite you, she said to Mara, to meet her. But we also understand if you need time. Time sounded like a luxury, and Mara didn't trust luxuries. She looked toward the harbor, where lanterns were being tested for the evening procession, little glowing boats on strings. I'll meet her, Mara said, but not in a mansion. Not yet. Alden's brows lifted. Where then? Mara pointed across the pier to the diner, the one with the neon anchor sign and the best chowder in 3 counties. There, she said, neutral ground, and if anyone tries to make it a spectacle, I'll leave. Celeste's lips trembled into something like a smile. That's fair, she said. Thank you. The diner smelled like onions, coffee, and old conversations. The waitress, Patty, had known Mara since she'd been small enough to sit on 2 stacked phone books to reach the counter, and Patty's eyes widened when she saw the Voss couple squeeze into a booth like the rest of humanity. Well, Patty said, setting down menus with theatrical cheer, Port Hollow gets fancy today. Mara's mother gave Patty a look that meant, not now. Patty's grin softened. Got it, she said. Chowder all around? Yes, Mara said immediately. Because some anchors were edible, they waited. Mara's leg bounced under the table. Her father stared out the window like a man watching weather. Her mother kept her hand on Mara's wrist, thumb moving in slow circles that said, I'm here, I'm here. Alden and Celeste whispered to each other, not conspiring, but bracing. Then the door jingled, and the diner's chatter thinned. A girl stepped in, hood up, followed by a tall man with a careful posture that screamed, security without the badge. The girl pushed back her hood and scanned the room with a painter's focus, noticing angles, shadows, the way light caught dust. When her eyes landed on Alden and Celeste, her face softened. When her eyes landed on Mara, her expression froze into a blankness so polished it looked practiced. Mara felt her own stomach drop. The girl walked to the booth, stopped at the edge like the floor might tilt, then slid in opposite Mara with a deliberate calm. The tall man hovered nearby until Celeste waved him off with a small, weary motion. "Sable," Celeste said, voice cracking. "This is Mara," Sable said before Celeste could finish. She said it like a word she'd tested in her mouth. "Mara Reed." Mara blinked. "How do you—" Sable's fingers tapped her knee in a rhythm that didn't match the diner's music. "I Googled," she said. "You think I didn't notice you two whispering like you were hiding a bomb? I saw the hospital's old name in Dad's calendar. I called the clinic. I found the nurse's obituary. I found the rest." She looked at Mara's parents, and then back to Mara. "So," she said, voice low, "I guess you're the girl who would have had my room." Mara braced for poison. Instead, Sable's next words came out like a confession. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not because I did anything, but because I know how it feels when a story you believed is suddenly written in someone else's handwriting." Mara's throat tightened. That was not in the tragedies she'd feared. "I'm sorry too," Mara said. Patty arrived with chowder bowls steaming like peace offerings and pretended not to notice how the table's gravity had shifted. As spoons clinked, small talk happened the way fog lifts. Slowly, with patches of clarity. Sable asked Mara about the harbor, about crab season, about what lanterns meant in Port Hollow. Mara asked Sable about drawing, about the accident, about whether she liked the ocean or only the idea of it. The questions were cautious at first, then curious. When Mara mentioned the repair shed and how her mother could fix a torn net faster than most people could send a text, Sable's eyes lit with genuine interest. "Can you show me?" she asked. Mara hesitated, then nodded. "If you want," she said. "But you might smell like fish after." Sable's mouth twitched. "I'm not made of porcelain," she said. "People act like money turns you brittle." Alden exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Celeste's eyes glistened. Mara's mother sipped chowder and said, "Good," because her approval was a straightforward tool. That afternoon, the two girls walked the dock together. Mara pointed out the best spots to watch seals. Sable pointed out the way light bounced off the water and painted the underside of clouds. Mara expected jealousy to creep in, but what she felt instead was a strange mirrored unease. They were both, in different ways, trespassing on a version of life. "So," Mara said, stopping near the old lighthouse that guarded Port Hollow's mouth, "what happens now?" Sable leaned on the railing. "Now we survive everyone else's opinions," she said dryly, "and we figure out what we actually want, instead of what a mix-up says we owe." Mara laughed, a short startled sound. "You talk like you're already tired." "I am," Sable said, and her honesty was sharp and refreshing. "Mom has been crying quietly in the bathroom. Dad has been staring at shipping reports like he can calculate his way out of guilt. And my aunt keeps calling to say this is a PR opportunity, which makes me want to throw my phone into the sea." Mara's hands tightened on the railing. "People will talk here too," she admitted. "Port Hollow loves gossip like it loves chowder." Sable glanced at her. "Do you want to go to their house?" Their house sounded like a museum. Mara swallowed. "Not yet," she said. "But I guess I should see it eventually." Sable nodded. "When you're ready," she said. "And when you do, I can show you the secret hallway behind the library panel that leads to the roof. It's the only place I can breathe when the house feels like a ship with too many passengers." Mara looked at her, startled. "Secret hallway?" Sable grinned, quick and mischievous. "Money buys weird architecture," she said. "Also, my brothers used to play pirate." "Brothers?" Mara repeated. Sable rolled her eyes. "Two of them," she said. "Orion is the eldest and thinks he's made of duty. Felix is the middle and thinks he's made of jokes." Mara imagined two boys in suits, guarding a castle. Her chest tightened again, the old fear script trying to play. Sable seemed to read it. "They're not monsters," she said. "They're annoying. That's different." When the lantern fair began at dusk, Port Hollow transformed. Boats were strung with lights that bobbed on the tide, and paper lanterns floated from the pier like a constellation at human height. Mara's mother insisted Mara wear her thick knit hat, the one with the crooked pom-pom, and Mara secretly felt relieved to look like herself. Alden and Celeste stood near the crowd with careful expressions, as if afraid joy might be disrespectful. Sable hovered close to Mara, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, scanning faces like an artist studying a crowd's anatomy. The lantern procession started with kids carrying glowing fish shapes, then teenagers with lanterns shaped like constellations, then the elders with lanterns made of stained glass, heavy with memory. When the first lantern was set onto the water, the harbor caught it gently and carried it outward. Each lantern held a wish written on rice paper. Mara's father wrote his with a carpenter's pencil, letters large and blunt. Mara's mother wrote hers with a practiced hand and then folded the paper like it might bruise. Sable stared at the blank strip in her own hands. "Do you write wishes?" Mara asked. Sable shrugged. "I sketch them," she said. "Words feel too final." Mara held out a pencil. "Then draw," she said. Sable's gaze softened. She knelt on the pier and drew a lighthouse, its beam sweeping across two shorelines at once. Beside it, she drew two girls with different hair, different postures, but the same crescent near the ear, like a secret stamp. Mara watched, heart unexpectedly full. When Sable slid the drawing into the lantern and lit the candle, the paper glowed from within like it had always belonged. The lantern drifted out into the dark water, and Mara felt, for a breath, that maybe this story could be kind. Kindness, however, did not mean uncomplicated. The next week, Alden asked Mara to visit the Voss estate for a family meeting. Mara pictured marble floors and silent judgment. Her stomach rolled. Her mother packed her a container of clam fritters anyway, because defense could be fried and shared. "If anyone acts like you're an inconvenience," her mother said, "you feed them and make them feel guilty." Mara almost cried at the practicality. Sable met Mara at the estate's gate, not inside. She wore jeans and an old sweatshirt with paint stains, as if refusing to greet Mara in armor. "You look like you're going to court," Sable said, eyeing Mara's borrowed blouse. "I feel like I'm going to be sentenced," Mara replied. Sable snorted. "Then come on," she said. "I'll show you the roof first." True to her promise, Sable guided Mara through a library that smelled of leather and lemon polish, then pressed a carved dolphin on a panel. The wall clicked and swung inward to reveal a narrow corridor. Mara's eyes widened. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, delighted despite herself. "It's also useful," Sable said, leading her up tight stairs to a rooftop terrace. From there, the ocean stretched wide, and Port Hollow's lighthouse was a small, familiar needle in the distance. "See?" Sable said. "Same water, different angles." Mara breathed out slowly. The meeting happened in a room with too many windows. Alden sat at the head of a long table, like a man trying to look smaller than his chair. Celeste sat beside him, hands clasped. Orion Voss stood, not sitting, because he radiated a kind of disciplined restlessness. He was tall, clean-cut, with eyes that measured rooms the way a captain measures wind. Felix lounged in a chair as if chairs were a sport. He grinned at Mara the moment she entered, the grin of someone who tried to defuse bombs with jokes. "So this is our sister," Felix said, and his voice held awkward warmth. "Hi, I'm Felix. I'm the one who'll get blamed when the media finds out, because I once smiled at a camera." Orion cleared his throat. "Mara," he said, formal but not cold. "Welcome. I'm sorry this has been—" He searched for a word that didn't insult anyone. "Violent," Mara offered, and it surprised her how true it felt. Orion's jaw tightened, then he nodded. "Yes," he replied. "Violent, not by intention, but by impact." Alden looked at Mara. "There are decisions to make," he said. "Legal documents, trust arrangements, school transfers if you want them, privacy measures if you don't." Mara's brain snagged on trust arrangements, like a net on a rock. Felix raised his hand. "Before we become a spreadsheet," he said, "can we establish something? Mara is not a ledger entry. Sable is not a placeholder. And if anyone here forgets that, I will personally haunt them with group chats." Sable kicked Felix's ankle under the table. "Threat accepted," Felix murmured. Celeste's lips quivered, but she managed a small smile. Mara felt weirdly grateful for Felix's nonsense. Alden inhaled, then spoke carefully. "Mara, you have every right to claim your name, your records, Your inheritance, he said. But you also have the right to refuse what feels wrong. Mara looked at her hands. She remembered her mother's porch, the repair shed's oil stains, the way Port Hollow's people showed love by fixing what was broken. She didn't want to be swallowed by wealth. She also didn't want to pretend she wasn't curious. I want my medical history, Mara said first, practical. I want the truth in writing. I don't want to be lied to for my own good. Orion nodded. Agreed, he said, like a contract. Mara continued, heart pounding. I don't want anyone to cut off my parents, she said, and she saw Celeste flinch, as if the words had claws. They're my parents. I'm not trading them. Alden's voice was rough. We're not asking you to, he said. We never would. Sable looked at Mara, eyes steady. We can be two families, Sable said. It's messy, but it's real. Felix clapped once, quiet and firm. Excellent, he said. Chaos, but loving chaos. That's my brand. Then Orion's gaze shifted to a folder on the table that Mara hadn't noticed at first. The folder's seal was stamped with a crest, and something in Mara's bones warned her. There's another matter, Orion said, and his tone changed, the way weather changes when pressure drops. A contract, he said. An engagement agreement. Mara's stomach sank so hard she almost laughed at the predictability. Sable groaned softly. Felix muttered, Of course there is. Celeste pressed her fingers to her temples. Alden looked ashamed. It was arranged years ago, he said. A business alliance with the Vale family. It was meant to secure a shipping corridor and stabilize a merger. It was old thinking. Mara's mouth went dry. Sable was engaged? She asked, though she already knew the answer by the way Sable's shoulders squared with stubborn resentment. On paper, Sable said. To someone I've met twice at charity events. He has the personality of a polished door. Felix coughed. Hey, he said, don't insult doors. Doors let you leave. Orion's eyes flicked to Mara, and Mara felt the weight of the word paper, like an anchor. The agreement specifies the Voss daughter, Orion said, voice tight, which was assumed to mean Sable. Mara's pulse hammered, and now Alden's gaze met hers, pained. Now the Vale family's lawyers will argue it means you, he said. Silence crashed into the room. Mara's first instinct was to flee, to run back to the repair shed and hide behind a pile of nets. Her second instinct was fury, bright and hot. I'm not a clause, she said. Celeste nodded rapidly. You're not, she agreed. We can fight it. Orion's expression remained controlled, but his hands curled briefly into fists. The Vale family will claim breach damages, he said. They'll threaten to expose the swap publicly in ways that could hurt both girls. Felix leaned forward, eyes suddenly sharp behind the jokes. So we don't let them control the narrative, he said. We tell it ourselves. Sable's gaze locked on Mara. You don't have to do anything, she said. If they try to shove this onto you, we burn the paper. Mara stared at the folder as if it were a trap. Who is he? She asked. The polished door. Felix grinned, but it was thinner now. Rowan Vale, he said. He runs their youth foundation and pretends to enjoy it. He sails too, which is unfair, because he's good at it, Orion added. He's competent, quiet. He dislikes attention. Mara almost barked a laugh. So the perfect person to be dragged into a scandal, she said. Alden's shoulders slumped. I never wanted this, he murmured. Mara felt the room waiting for her to collapse. Instead, she inhaled and did something her old self wouldn't have done. She asked for information. Can I meet him? She said. Everyone blinked. Why? Sable demanded, protective. Mara set her palm on the table. Because I don't negotiate with ghosts, she said. If he's real, I want to see his face before I decide how to fight. Felix whistled softly. Port Hollow has teeth, he said, impressed. The meeting with Rowan Vale happened at a marina cafe in the city, where yachts gleamed like expensive lies. Mara wore her knit hat anyway, stubbornly out of place. Sable sat beside her like a guard dog in human form. Felix came too, claiming he was there for moral support and pastries. Orion stayed back to handle lawyers, which sounded like wrestling sharks. Rowan arrived 5 minutes early, which annoyed Felix, and he walked with an economy of movement that suggested he hated wasting energy. He wasn't stunning in the movie star sense. He was quietly striking, like a well-built boat, and his eyes held a steady gray focus that made Mara feel both seen and assessed. He greeted Sable first with a nod. "Sable," he said. Then his gaze moved to Mara. "Mara Reed," he said, and the way he pronounced her last name had respect in it, not condescension. Mara blinked. "You know me," she said. Rowan's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. "I read," he said. "I was informed there is confusion." "I don't enjoy confusion." Felix waved a croissant like a baton. "Nobody enjoys confusion," he said, "except toddlers and certain reality TV producers." Rowan ignored Felix with professional skill. He sat, folded his hands, and looked at Mara. "I was engaged to the Voss daughter by contract," he said. "I did not sign it, but I was raised under it. I have never believed any person should be required to marry for shipping lanes." Mara stared at him. He sounded sincere, and sincerity from this world felt suspicious. "Then why are we here?" she asked. Rowan didn't flinch. "Because the Vale elders believe duty is a religion," he said. "Because if they cannot claim compliance, they will attempt control through punishment. I would like to prevent collateral damage." Sable snorted. "Collateral damage," she repeated. "That's us." Rowan's gaze softened a fraction. "Yes," he said. "And I'm sorry." Felix leaned back. "Okay," he said. "I didn't expect the polished door to speak in complete sentences with feelings." Rowan glanced at Felix. "Doors are useful," he said flatly. Felix choked on his coffee, delighted. Mara found herself smiling despite the knot in her chest. "What do you want, Rowan?" Mara asked. Direct. Rowan paused, choosing words like someone navigating reefs. "I want this agreement nullified," he said. "I want the story, when it becomes public, to hurt neither of you. And," he added, eyes steady on Mara, "I want to ensure you are not forced into a role you didn't choose." Mara's defenses wavered. That sounded like ally language. "How?" she asked. Rowan slid a folder across the table. "By using the contract's own language," he said. "There's a clause about shared guardianship obligations that was intended for business risk. It can be interpreted as an obligation to provide educational support and legal protection, not marital union, if both parties agree and register an amendment." Sable leaned forward, skeptical. "You can just rewrite it?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "Not easily," he said, "but I can force the elders into arbitration where public exposure becomes a risk for them. They prefer silence. Silence is leverage." Felix whistled again. "This door has hinges," he said. Mara's thoughts churned. She had expected a villain or a puppet. Rowan seemed neither. "Why help us?" Mara asked. Rowan's gaze drifted to the marina's water, then back. "When I was 15, he said, my younger sister was injured during a storm because adults prioritized a ceremony over evacuation. I learned then that tradition, unchecked, is just another form of negligence." His voice stayed calm, but the words carried weight. "I will not be negligent again." Mara's throat tightened. Sable's expression softened, reluctantly. "Fine," Sable said. "But if you betray us, I'll paint you in the ugliest color I can invent." Rowan blinked. "I accept," he said solemnly, and Felix cackled. The weeks that followed were a blur of school, meetings, and the strange new choreography of having two homes. Mara still helped at the repair shed on weekends, hands in grease, while also attending tutoring sessions arranged by Celeste, who apologized before every suggestion like she feared imposing. Sable began coming to Port Hollow more often, sketching the harbor, drawing Patty's Diner sign, sitting on the repair shed roof with Mara, and eating clam fritters like they were gourmet. The town watched. Of course, Port Hollow had eyes everywhere, but it also had a stubborn heart. When Mrs. Klein from the bait shop tried to whisper that Mara would forget her roots, Mara's mother handed Mrs. Klein a paint roller and said, "If your mouth needs work, use your hands instead." Mrs. Klein, confronted with labor, forgot to be cruel. At school in the city, the gossip was sharper. Mara enrolled at Harborcrest Academy as a special placement, and the hallways smelled of expensive cologne and ambitious futures. Mara expected to be hunted by cliques. Instead, the first week, a boy in a blazer asked her, wide-eyed, "Is it true you can repair a motor with duct tape and prayer?" Mara stared. Duct tape and knowledge, she corrected. The boy looked impressed, as if she'd confessed to sorcery. The real tension came not from students but from adults. A woman from Voss Maritime's board, Dr. Lenora Pike, Alden's chief operations officer, began appearing at meetings with a smile that never reached her eyes. She spoke of brand management, of strategic messaging, of minimizing reputational volatility. Mara disliked her immediately, which made Mara distrust her own judgment, because she'd never been trained to read corporate sharks. Sable disliked Pike too, which made Mara feel better. "She's cold," Sable said one night while they sat on Mara's bed in the estate's guest wing, surrounded by Sable's scattered charcoal sketches. "She looks at people like inventory." Mara swallowed. "Maybe that's how business is," Mara said, uncertain. Sable shook her head. "No," she said. "Seeing people like inventory is how bad business pretends it's smart." Trouble arrived, disguised as paperwork. One afternoon, Alden called Mara into his office, his face pale. "We've discovered irregularities," he said, "in our coastal compliance reports." Mara blinked. "What kind?" "Dumping," Orion said from the corner, voice like steel. "Illegal discharge, not by our ships, by a subcontractor, but under our permits." Celeste's eyes filled with dread. "The bay," she whispered. "Port Hollow's bay." Mara's stomach dropped. Port Hollow's economy was the water. The water was everyone's bloodline. "When?" Mara demanded. Orion slid a chart forward. "Over the past 6 months," he said. "Small amounts, hidden in storm periods." Mara's mind flashed to the hurricane clinic 17 years ago, to storms as cover. "Who?" she asked. Alden's voice was grim. "We don't know yet," he said, "but the regulator will come down hard. There are already rumors of an investigation." Sable's jaw tightened. "Pike," she said immediately. "She knows every subcontract." Alden looked pained. "Lenora Pike has been loyal for 15 years, he said. "Accusing her is not worse than poisoning Port Hollow," Mara snapped, and her own fierceness startled her. Orion's gaze flicked to Mara with something like respect. "We need evidence," Orion said. "If the Vale elders find out, they'll use it. If the press finds out, they'll burn everything." Mara's hands trembled. "If the bay is hurt," she said, "my parents will feel it before any headline does." Celeste reached for Mara's hand. "Help us," she pleaded softly. Mara breathed in, tasting the imaginary sting of contaminated water. "I will," she said. Rowan Vale became unexpectedly useful. He had access to legal channels and a dislike of Pike's smooth manipulations. When Mara told him about the dumping, his expression hardened into focus. "Storm cover suggests deliberate timing," he said. "If someone is hiding, they assume no one will look because everyone is busy surviving." Mara stared at him across the cafe table. "Port Hollow doesn't stop looking," she said. Rowan nodded. "Then we use that," he replied. Sable contributed her art in a way that surprised everyone. She began sketching the bay's shoreline, marking where dead fish had been found, where seaweed beds had thinned, where water smelled metallic after rain. Her drawings became a map of suspicion. "Data is a story," she said, tapping the paper. "And stories make people pay attention." Felix predictably provided chaos. He posed as a social media intern, flirted with Pike's assistant, and obtained a calendar of private inspections that didn't match official logs. "I am both a menace and a gift," he announced, dropping the calendar on the kitchen counter like a trophy. Orion pinched the bridge of his nose. "You are a liability," he corrected. "I am a liability with results," Felix insisted. They needed proof that could survive court, not just suspicion. So Mara went back to what she knew: tools, tides, and the stubborn truth of mechanical patterns. She asked her father to teach her how to check a boat's bilge system for signs of chemical residue, and her father did it without asking why. Because in Port Hollow, teaching was love. They borrowed an old skiff and installed a cheap water sensor array that Mara and Sable built together on the repair shed floor, wires everywhere like a robot's guts. Mara expected Sable to flinch at the grime. Sable only rolled up her sleeves and said, "Hand me the solder." They launched at dawn, when the bay was glassy, and the only sound was a distant buoy bell. Mara piloted by instinct. Sable took samples with careful hands. The sensor pinged a faint anomaly near the mouth of the bay, close to where a private dock jutted from a rocky point. "That's not a public dock," Mara murmured. Sable's brows knit. It belongs to Voss Maritime's Heritage Warehouse, she said, bitter. The one Pike renovated for gala tours. Mara's jaw clenched. We go tonight, she said. Sable's eyes widened. Tonight? Mara nodded. During the storm forecast, she said. They hide in storms. Sable's mouth curved into a fierce grin. Then we become the storm's witnesses, she said. That night, rain came sideways, and the lighthouse beam swept the dark like a searching eye. Mara's parents didn't know where she was. Mara told them she was studying at the estate, and guilt sat in her stomach like a stone. But if the bay was in danger, Mara couldn't stay still. Orion insisted on coming, despite his hatred of wet weather. Felix came too, wearing a raincoat that made him look like an anxious banana. Rowan arrived with a waterproof case of legal documents and a calm that was almost eerie. If we are caught trespassing, he said, I would like to be on record as advising against it. Noted, Felix said. Now hop in, door with hinges. They approached the Heritage Warehouse by water, engine off, paddling silently. Sable held a small drone, modified with a quiet rotor. This is illegal, Orion muttered. So is dumping, Mara whispered back. They reached the dock. A faint light glowed under the warehouse's slatted boards. Someone was there. Mara's heart hammered as she tied the skiff. She crept forward, the rain masking her steps. Through a crack in the wall, she saw men in reflective gear connecting hoses to barrels stamped with hazard symbols. A familiar voice gave crisp instructions. Doctor, Lenora Pike. Her silhouette was unmistakable. Posture straight even in storm shadows. Move, Pike said. The storm surge will carry it out. By morning, the bay will look clean. Mara's stomach twisted. Sable's hand gripped Mara's sleeve, knuckles white. Orion's face in the darkness looked carved from anger. Rowan lifted the drone, and Sable silently launched it through the crack. The drone's tiny camera recorded everything. Pike's face, the barrels, the hose, the way the water below swirled with an oily sheen. Felix, shaking with adrenaline, whispered, Please tell me the drone has a zoom. Sable whispered back, It has my rage. That's better than zoom. Then, because the universe hated quiet victories, Mara's foot slid on wet wood and knocked a loose plank. The clatter was small but sharp. Pike's head snapped up. Who's there? She shouted. A flashlight beam cut through the slats. Mara didn't think. She acted. She grabbed Sable's hand and yanked her toward the dock. Orion swore and followed. Felix flailed, then sprinted with unexpected speed. Rowan moved last, measured even in chaos, but his eyes were alert. Stop! Pike barked. Security! Someone inside the warehouse ran toward the door. The rain intensified, and the dock swayed. Mara shoved Felix into the skiff, then Sable, then Orion. Rowan jumped in as Mara cut the rope, and the skiff drifted away just as a guard burst onto the dock. The guard aimed a light at them, but the lighthouse beam swept across at that exact moment, blinding him for a second, and Mara paddled hard into the darkness like the sea itself was a tunnel. Behind them, Pike's voice sliced the storm. You don't know what you're doing, she yelled. Mara shouted back, raw and furious. I know exactly what you did. They escaped, barely. And in the estate's garage, they huddled around Sable's laptop while the storm raged outside. The footage was clear. Pike's face, Pike's orders, the dumping equipment, the timestamp. Orion's hands shook as he copied files to multiple drives. Rowan typed a legal notice, with calm precision. Felix stared at the screen and whispered, We are so grounded. Sable's eyes were bright with something close to triumph, but her voice trembled. She was going to poison my home, she said. Mara swallowed hard. Both our homes, Mara corrected gently. In the morning, the story broke. Not as a leak controlled by Vale elders, but as a formal complaint filed with regulators, accompanied by footage and sworn statements. Orion held a press conference and spoke without corporate fluff, his voice steady, his eyes haunted. We failed in oversight, he said. We will not fail in accountability. Alden stood beside him, jaw tight, and Celeste held Sable's hand while also reaching for Mara's, bridging bodies like she was determined to make the world understand. There were no sides here, only people. Lenora Pike was arrested pending investigation. The subcontractors' permits were frozen. Voss Maritime's stock dipped, then stabilized as public trust rose in response to transparency. Port Hollows Bay, tested daily, showed contamination but not catastrophe, because the dumping had been smaller than Pike's ambition, and because the storm's timing had been matched by Mara's stubborn vigilance. When Mara returned to Port Hollow after the press frenzy, she expected judgment. Instead, Patty at the diner hugged her so hard, Mara's hat nearly flew off. "You did good," Patty said fiercely. "You did real good." Mara's father didn't say much. He just handed Mara a wrench and pointed to a boat engine. "Fix this," he said. "Then we'll talk." Mara fixed it, hands steady, and then she cried into her father's shoulder like she was still a kid. Sable visited Port Hollow again, this time without guards. And the town treated her with cautious curiosity that warmed into acceptance when she helped repaint the lighthouse's weathered fence. Felix arrived wearing boots and declared himself a rural influencer, then got chased by a territorial peacock belonging to Mrs. Dalloway. "Why is it sparkling with hatred?" Felix yelled while running. Mara laughed until her ribs hurt, and Sable sketched the scene, charcoal flying like confetti. The engagement contract, stripped of its teeth by Rowan's amendment strategy, dissolved in arbitration. The Vale elders tried to posture, but public scrutiny made them retreat like crabs into rocks. Rowan, unexpectedly, became a quiet friend. He came to Port Hollow once, standing awkwardly on the dock in a raincoat that fit too perfectly. Mara offered him chowder, and then showed him how to tie a proper cleat hitch. He watched her hands with serious attention. "You learn quickly," he said. "I had good teachers," Mara replied, thinking of her father. Rowan nodded once, understanding more than she'd expected. On the lighthouse hill, as sunset turned the water molten, Rowan confessed he had never been anywhere that felt this honest. Mara teased him. "Careful," she said. "You'll start liking the smell of fish." Rowan's mouth twitched. "It's better than the smell of fear," he said. Sable, watching them from a few steps away, called, "If you two start being romantic, I'm going to pretend I'm an only child again." Mara threw a pebble at her, and Sable dodged, laughing. Years did not pass in a montage. They arrived like tides, each one changing the shore a little. Mara chose to study coastal economics and environmental finance, not because she wanted boardrooms, but because she'd learned money could either drown a bay or save it. She split her time between Port Hollow and the city, building a scholarship program that funded kids from harbor towns to study marine science and mechanical trades. Alden supported it with quiet pride. Celeste visited Port Hollow often, learning how to gut a fish without flinching and how to smile without apology. Orion became less rigid, though he still hated surprise parties. Felix started a non-profit for coastal cleanup and accidentally became famous when a video of him getting pecked by the peacock went viral. He insisted it was for awareness. Sable opened a small studio near the harbor, its walls covered in paintings that made people stop mid-step. She painted storms with tenderness, not just terror, and she painted 2 shorelines joined by 1 lighthouse beam. On the studio's opening night, she pulled Mara into a side room and pressed a small canvas into her hands. The painting showed a repaired boat engine, gleaming, surrounded by hands of different sizes reaching in together. On the engine casing, Sable had painted a tiny crescent near the edge. Mara's eyes burned. "You made this for me," Mara whispered. "I made it for us," Sable corrected. One late autumn evening, Mara and Rowan stood on the old pier where lanterns had once drifted. The bay was calm, and the lighthouse beam swept in its patient rhythm. Rowan held a small box that looked suspiciously like a ring box, and Mara laughed before nerves could swallow her. "If this is a diamond," Mara said, "I'm going to throw it at a seagull." Rowan's eyes warmed. "It's not a diamond," he said. He opened the box. Inside was a ring made from polished sea glass set in simple silver, green as deep water. "I asked Sable to choose the glass," Rowan said. "She threatened me with ugly colors if I chose wrong." Mara's laughter turned into a breathy sound that might have been a sob. "Why?" she asked, even though she knew. Rowan's voice stayed steady, but it carried the weight of every choice made freely. "Because you taught me that contracts are not the only way to commit," he said. "Because you showed me how to fix what's broken instead of hiding it. Because when I'm with you, I can breathe." Mara stared at the ring, then at the ocean, then at Rowan's face. She imagined her mother's grin, her father's quiet nod, Sable's mocking tears, Felix's dramatic cheering, Orion's reluctant smile. "Okay," Mara said, and the word held a whole life. Rowan slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. Not perfectly, because hands change with work, but honestly, because honest things allow room to grow. Sable appeared from behind a piling, as if summoned by a romantic signal flare, and shouted, "Finally!" I was freezing. Felix popped up next to her with a thermos. "I brought hot cocoa for the engagement," he announced. Orion emerged last, pretending he hadn't reminded everyone to bring umbrellas. Mara shook her head, laughing, and pulled them all into a messy group hug that smelled like salt and paint and coffee and home. The ocean kept moving. The lighthouse kept turning. The past remained true without owning them. And in Port Hollow, where lanterns were set afloat each winter to carry wishes out to sea, Mara wrote her wish this time in words, not because words were final, but because she had learned they could also be beginnings. Let both shorelines be safe. Let both girls be whole. Let love be a choice, not a clause. The lantern drifted away, glowing softly, and the water held it gently, as if the sea, too, believed in second drafts.